So far in this series, we've seen how years of careful scientific research have clarified and improved our understanding of alcoholism. We've discussed genetics, brain chemistry, acute and chronic effects of alcohol, and described the reward model of addiction to provide you with a more complete explanation for the progression, symptoms, and consequences of alcoholism. As a result of years of scientific and clinical study, we no longer think of alcoholism as being the result of weak character or poor morals, but recognize it as being the result of a variety of biological and environmental factors. We've also shown how, for much of the 20th century, the most widely accepted explanation of alcoholism was the dependence model of addiction. This model was an important step in improving our understanding of problem drinking because it allowed alcoholism to be viewed as a disorder needing medical treatment, rather than simply one requiring better moral guidance. Eventually, however, the search for a more complete explanation for alcoholism led to the reward or reinforcement model of addiction. As we have discussed in earlier programs, the reinforcement model views problem drinking as ultimately arising from alcohol's reinforcing effects. In this program, we're going to take a closer look at how this understanding of alcoholism as a biologically based disorder can give treatment providers new options and better insight into their clients' struggles with alcoholism. Although alcoholism has long been thought of as a disease, until recently we did not understand enough about its biological basis to truly convince many skeptics. Until the 1970s, our best explanation for alcoholism was the dependency model of addiction. It proposed that alcoholics drank to avoid the discomfort of withdrawal symptoms. As a result, only those individuals who were physically addicted to alcohol were considered alcoholics. While this model helped to improve treatment for many alcoholics by removing some of the stigma of the disorder, the dependence theory left some important aspects of alcoholism unaccounted for. For example, it could not explain why someone would drink enough alcohol in the first place to become an alcoholic. Alcoholics, on the other hand, would provide any number of reasons to explain their excessive drinking habits, ranging from a bad day at the office to having a history of child abuse. While these explanations may provide important reasons why people start to drink, research has shown that genetics and brain chemistry may better explain why they continue to drink. Because the dependence model only considered individuals who were physically addicted to be alcoholics, many problem drinkers were left untreated because they were too early in their addiction process to be diagnosed as an alcoholic. As a result, by the time they were recognized as needing treatment, many alcoholics had already progressed to a state of severe physical and emotional crisis. With such desperate circumstances, it's easy to see why complete abstinence was considered the only legitimate treatment and the only true measure of a successful recovery. It's also easy to see why relapses were viewed not only as life-threatening, but even suicidal. Because of the severity of their clients' symptoms, treatment programs focused on breaking through denial by confronting alcoholics with the consequences of their drinking and insisting upon their involvement in Alcoholics Anonymous, a group founded by alcoholics who had also faced similar desperation. If alcoholics experienced cravings, they were advised to remember the last time they were drunk and questioned to see if they were going to enough AA meetings. 90 meetings in 90 days was a common recommendation. Although effective for many alcoholics, these methods were developed primarily through trial and error. This caused many skeptics in the scientific community to label these approaches as folk wisdom. While researchers wanted greater scientific understanding to guide alcoholism treatment, clinicians had other concerns. They realized that many of their clients with drinking problems were suffering severe consequences long before becoming physically dependent on alcohol. The reinforcement model of addiction addressed the concerns of both groups. It provides a scientific basis for the addiction process, while also offering scientific support for many traditional treatment approaches. It also explains alcoholism in terms that can include, but do not require, physical addiction. The reinforcement model of addiction draws upon decades of genetic and neurobiology studies. involving both laboratory animals and human families, to provide us with a more comprehensive understanding of alcoholism. An understanding that includes a biological basis for the development of alcoholism, cravings, and other addictive behaviors. The reinforcement model says that people drink because in one way or another, it makes them feel better. Sometimes feeling better involves looking for a good time, and other times it means trying to avoid bad times. Research has found that some people have a genetic predisposition for becoming an alcoholic. This genetic predisposition produces differences in the brain chemistry of the reward pathways. Regardless of whether a person has inherited a genetic predisposition towards alcoholism or not, the reward pathways occupy center stage in providing an explanation of the biological basis of alcoholism. Understanding the function of the reward pathways can help to explain some of the lifestyle changes that are important to recovery from alcoholism. For example, clinicians have long observed that places, people, activities, and feelings that are strongly associated with alcohol drinking tend to cause cravings for alcohol. Clinicians suggested that by avoiding these things, cravings could be reduced. However, they could not explain why this was so. Scientists have discovered that the brain learns to anticipate drinking. When things that are associated with drinking are present, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine in the reward pathways. This is called an anticipatory response. And when it happens, we experience it as a craving for alcohol. Anticipatory responses are automatic, but by changing behavior, they can be reduced or entirely prevented. A related example of a traditional treatment approach that was sometimes dismissed as folklore is the advice alcoholics were given to eat candy to help reduce cravings for alcohol. For some alcoholics, this actually works. Knowledge of the reward pathways tells us that this may be because candy, like all pleasurable experiences, causes the release of dopamine and stimulates the reward pathways. The release of dopamine caused by eating candy may help overcome cravings for alcohol, which we know are caused by the release of small amounts of dopamine in the reward pathways. Although using candy to stimulate the reward pathways can lead to its own set of problems for some individuals, it does point us toward the concept of what is called behavior substitution, which is the systematic replacement of alcohol with other non-drug reinforcers. Clinicians have long observed that people who develop one addiction tend to have difficulty moderating other potentially addictive behaviors. We now know that the reward pathways are involved with all our feelings of pleasure, regardless of source, and are a common biological component to all forms of addiction. Indeed, the reward pathways may represent the biological reality of what has sometimes incorrectly been called the addictive personality. This may explain why abstinent alcoholics frequently experience problems moderating other rewarding behaviors, such as gambling, eating, and sex. In addition to providing explanations for the effectiveness of some traditional treatment approaches, the reinforcement model can also suggest new treatment procedures that can be implemented much earlier in the progression of problem drinking. Because traditional treatment approaches were developed to work with alcoholics who had hit bottom, they tend to focus on the negatively reinforcing effects of alcohol, drinking to avoid feeling bad. Fortunately, we no longer wait for a person to become physically dependent upon alcohol before identifying them as having a problem. As a result, more and more alcoholics are now being treated long before they hit bottom. This early diagnosis of alcoholism has been referred to as raising the bottom. Thanks to raising the bottom, most problem drinkers now receive treatment before they have developed severe medical problems, which can often improve the individual's chances of recovery. While relapses will continue to be a challenge for alcoholics and their treatment providers, not all relapses are created equal. A relapse for a late-stage alcoholic can easily result in a life-threatening situation. However, for someone with less severe alcohol dependence, relapses may not be nearly as dangerous. While complete abstinence remains an important treatment goal for people with severe alcohol dependence, it is probably not effective with early problem drinkers. Trying to shock and confront early problem drinkers with the prospect of consequences they may not experience for years is likely to be ineffective. In general, Research shows that treatment guided by our understanding of the reinforcement model and the neurobiological basis of addiction is more successful than confrontation-based approaches. One of the new approaches available to treatment providers is the medication called Naltrexone. Naltrexone represents a giant leap forward in our understanding of alcoholism. It is the first new medication for the treatment of alcoholism in the U.S. since antabuse was introduced in the late 1940s. In order to understand how truly revolutionary Naltrexone is, we first need to look at how antabuse works. Antabuse works by interfering with the liver's ability to break down alcohol. Normally, the liver uses a multiple-step process to remove alcohol from the body. In the first step, the liver changes the alcohol into a toxic chemical called acetaldehyde. The morning after headaches and nausea that we call a hangover is probably a mild case of acetaldehyde poisoning. Because acetaldehyde is so toxic, our liver tries to break it down as quickly as possible into acetic acid. It is at this stage that antabuse works, by preventing the liver from breaking acetaldehyde down into acetic acid. People who drink while taking antabuse suffer a buildup of acetaldehyde inside their bodies, causing them to become very ill. If you can imagine your worst hangover times 10, you have a good idea of how antabuse works. Because it doesn't do anything to reduce cravings or to provide alternative coping strategies, antabuse by itself is not an effective treatment for alcoholism. However, it does help some alcoholics stay sober long enough to take advantage of psychosocial treatment programs. Naltrexone works in a very different way than antabuse. We know that the feelings of pleasure we feel from drinking alcohol are created by the release of the neurotransmitter dopamine in the reward pathways area of the brain. We also know that some alcoholics are genetically programmed to release larger than normal amounts of dopamine when they drink, giving them a larger dopamine reward for their drinking. Naltrexone may help alcoholics to stay sober by changing the alcoholic's brain chemistry to limit the release of dopamine in the reward pathways. This decreased release of dopamine reduces both the frequency and intensity of cravings for alcohol. It also reduces the amount of pleasure a person feels if they do drink. The result is that alcohol becomes a less effective reinforcer. According to the reinforcement model, as drinking stops being a source of reinforcement, alcoholics become less likely to drink in the future. Unlike antabuse, which targets the liver and punishes people for drinking alcohol by making them sick, Naltrexone works by reducing the reinforcing properties of alcohol at the biological source of alcoholism, the brain. Because it goes right to the source, Naltrexone has become a powerful new tool to help alcoholics remain sober long enough to make the behavior changes that will keep them sober over the long term. Even though some alcoholics did experience relapses while taking Naltrexone, they reported that drinking alcohol was not nearly as enjoyable as it had been in the past, and their relapses were less severe. As a result, many quit drinking after only a couple of drinks, rather than continuing on a drunken binge. As dramatic and exciting as these results may seem, not all studies have shown Naltrexone to be equally helpful. Like antabuse, Naltrexone is most effective when taken by individuals who are also participating in other forms of alcoholism treatment. Naltrexone has also met some resistance as a treatment for alcoholism for other reasons. For some individuals, treating a drug addiction with another drug is a highly controversial and unacceptable notion. For them, the concept defies reasoning. This resistance may be due to an underlying confusion about these types of medications. Naltrexone works because it changes the levels of neurotransmitters in areas of the brain that impact the addiction process. Although it affects the same brain areas as drugs of abuse, it is critical to understand that Naltrexone is not a mood-altering or addictive medication. Another reason for the controversy may be due to the mistaken belief that drugs like Naltrexone are intended to replace the necessary lifestyle changes that form the core of many traditional recovery approaches. In other words, why would alcoholics work to attain a sober lifestyle when they can turn to a drug like naltrexone? This argument is unfounded because naltrexone, like antabuse, is not intended to be the exclusive source for recovery. Naltrexone is intended to be merely just one component of a comprehensive program that includes counseling and group support, among other possible forms of treatment. The reinforcement model, combined with our knowledge of the neurobiology of alcoholism, provides more than just an understanding of how medications like naltrexone work. This information can also help treatment providers to shift their emphasis toward interventions that now have a clear neurobiological basis. To successfully recover, alcoholics are faced with several daunting obstacles. They have to learn to substitute non-drug-related positive reinforcers for drinking alcohol. They need to conquer their cravings by avoiding the people, places, and activities they associate most with drinking. And they need to find alternative coping strategies for stress and emotional pain. Substituting non-drug positive reinforcers in the place of alcohol is a particularly difficult challenge. If an early problem drinker progresses to regular abuse of alcohol, they have probably already substituted most of their healthier activities for those related to alcohol. As a result, alcoholics make alcohol their number one method for stimulating their reward pathways. Because alcohol is such a powerful, reliable, and almost instantly gratifying reinforcer, recovering alcoholics struggle to replace it with other less pleasurable alternatives. Therein lies one of the major barriers to recovery for an alcoholic. To succeed, alcoholics have to face the fact that it will take a considerable effort to stimulate the reward pathways using healthy alternatives. They may have to accept the fact that most healthy reinforcers will never feel as pleasurable as drinking. As discussed earlier, many alcoholics develop behavioral addictions. This is because the substitutes they have chosen for alcohol are other highly effective methods of stimulating their reward pathways, such as eating, gambling, and sex. We have also discussed the nature of cravings. Because we know that cravings stem from the brain's anticipatory response to cues associated with familiar drinking situations, alcoholics should avoid the people, places, and activities they associate most with drinking. Because some alcoholics drink to cope with stress and emotional pain, the brain also learns that certain stressors or unpleasant emotions signal a bout of excessive drinking. Therefore, stress and emotional pain can also trigger anticipatory responses that are experienced as cravings for alcohol. Because these are slippery places that we carry around inside us, learning new methods of coping with stress or emotional pain plays a central role in the treatment of alcoholism. Recognizing that alcoholics can remain at risk until they learn to deal appropriately with painful emotions, traditional treatment programs and support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous have always emphasized the development of alternative coping strategies. In the last 2 decades, there has been a revolution in our understanding of alcoholism. Our knowledge of the neurobiology of alcoholism and our understanding of the reinforcement model of addiction has redefined alcoholism as a brain-based disorder. Understanding the role that the reward pathways play in alcoholism has led to the development of effective new medications to reduce cravings. Knowledge of the reward pathways has also confirmed the importance of several treatment approaches. We see the need for a recovering alcoholic to find substitute, healthier, non-drug-related reinforcers for alcohol. We now understand the science behind the need for alcoholics to avoid the people, places, and activities they associate most with drinking. And we now understand the scientific basis for why alcoholics need to learn alternative ways of coping with stress and unpleasant emotions. But perhaps the most important thing that we have learned is that whether it's medication, behavior modification, or other psychosocial treatments, there is still no single answer to the complicated problem of alcoholism.